There's this massive contradiction between the cartoonish legend of King Henry VIII that we all grew up with and the absolute geopolitical earthquake that the man actually caused. We're going to look at how a terrifying, paranoid monarch inadvertently created the modern world. So, when you hear the name Henry VIII, what is the very first image that pops into your head? I mean, for most of us, it's that classic myth, right? We picture a giant man wrapped in heavy velvet robes, chomping on a massive roast turkey leg, and casually ordering the execution of yet another wife. We all know the catchy nursery rhyme: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Okay, let's really dive into this. We're so used to picturing that nursery rhyme villain, that gluttonous royal soap opera star we just talked about. But the reality? The reality is he was an accidental architect. If you reduce Henry to just his marriages and his waistline, you miss the most important truth. He didn't just rule medieval England. He completely dismantled it and rebuilt it from the ground up. He shattered the power of Rome, he built the foundations of the Royal Navy, and literally invented the concept of modern national sovereignty. And the wildest part of the whole shebang? He didn't do it out of some grand, enlightened vision for the future. No, he did it to satisfy his own petty personal desires and obsessions. All right, let's get into Section 1, the desperate Tudor dynasty, a legacy built on paranoia. To really grasp the earthquake Henry unleashed, we have to rewind and look at the bloody context he was actually born into. Before him, England practically tore itself to shreds in the Wars of the Roses. His father, Henry VII, barely won the crown and spent his entire reign acting like an anxious accountant, just hoarding gold and doing absolutely anything to ensure this super fragile new Tudor dynasty would actually survive. And we kind of have to forget the bloated tyrant for a second to understand the young king. Young Henry, he was a golden boy, over 6 foot tall, incredibly handsome, athletic, and brilliantly educated. He only became heir because his older brother Arthur tragically died. Henry was even awarded the title Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith. I mean, he was such a devout Catholic champion that he wrote blistering defenses of the Pope against early Protestants. But, beneath all that glitter, a quiet nightmare was brewing. Henry desperately needed a male heir to prevent the country from sliding right back into civil war. His wife, Catherine of Aragon, who, by the way, was his dead brother's widow, suffered multiple tragic stillbirths. They had only one surviving girl, Mary. So Henry began to panic. And because he genuinely believed God spoke through earthly events, this wasn't just bad medical luck in his eyes. He found a verse in the book of Leviticus about the curse of marrying a brother's wife and convinced himself God was actively punishing him. It wasn't just a political problem. It was a frantic, terrifying theological crisis. Which brings us to Section 2, the original Brexit, the King's Great Matter. So right as Henry was spiraling, in steps the witty, highly educated Anne Boleyn. And she basically tells him she won't be his mistress, she will only share his bed if she wears his crown. But Henry hits a massive, disastrous political wall. He asks Pope Clement VII for a routine annulment, but the Pope was basically a prisoner of the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. And Charles V just so happened to be Catherine of Aragon's nephew. So the Pope was trapped. He literally couldn't grant the annulment. Furious, Henry turned to a new, ruthless playbook, engineered by his brilliant political fixers, Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer. Their logic was, why beg an Italian bishop for permission to manage your own kingdom? First, they told Henry he wasn't just a king, he was an emperor with total authority, completely stripping the Pope of his power in England. Second, they appointed Cranmer as archbishop to officially annul the marriage so Henry could marry the now pregnant Anne Boleyn. And finally, they passed the ultimate law to make the whole thing permanent. And the result of all that maneuvering? The Act of Supremacy in 1534. This law declared the King of England as the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. So the really crucial point here is, with the simple stroke of a pen, Henry cut England away from Catholic Europe forever. He essentially executed the original Brexit 500 years before the term was even invented. Moving right along to Section 3, Wives, Wealth, and Terror. Now, a mere paper declaration wasn't going to cut it. Henry needed cash, he needed total control, and he needed a terrifying police state to enforce his brand new reality. Think about this staggering number for a second. 1/3. At the time, monasteries and religious houses owned roughly 1/3 of all the fertile land in England. They were incredibly wealthy, and they functioned as the medieval social safety net. So Thomas Cromwell launched a violent audit, liquidating nearly 900 religious houses. But Henry burned through that stolen cash fast, so he ended up selling the land at discount prices to local noblemen and lawyers.
Without even meaning to, Henry created a brand new, fiercely loyal gentry class who would guard the Protestant Reformation with their lives, simply because their new wealth absolutely depended on it.
To force the country to actually accept this cultural catastrophe, Henry unleashed a literal reign of terror. Under the 1534 Treason Act, just speaking against the king became punishable by horrific execution. He even beheaded his own former chancellor, the famous philosopher Thomas More. And when 40,000 ordinary people rebelled in what was called the Pilgrimage of Grace, Henry outright lied to them. He promised them pardons if they went home, and the very moment they disbanded, he slaughtered them. He left their charismatic leader, Robert Aske, hanging in heavy iron chains from York Castle to slowly starve to death in the wind. Just absolutely brutal. And while the whole country trembled, Henry's personal life was just this chaotic sequence of terror. Let's run through it. Catherine of Aragon, annulled. Anne Boleyn, who promised him a son but delivered a girl named Elizabeth, accused of fake treason charges and beheaded by a French swordsman. Jane Seymour finally gave him a son, Edward, but tragically died days later. Anne of Cleves, whom he found repulsive, peacefully annulled. Then he married the teenager Catherine Howard. When she had an affair, he had her beheaded. Actually, it's so incredibly sad. She was so young and terrified, she asked for the wooden block the night before so she could practice laying her head on it. Finally, there was Catherine Parr, who intelligently managed to outlive him. This era also brought about the horrifying physical decay of the man himself. In 1536, a fully armored warhorse fell on Henry during a jousting accident. Medical historians believe he suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. He went from a rational athlete with a 32-inch waist to a paranoid, exploding tyrant with a 54-inch waist weighing nearly 400 pounds. Because of rotting, agonizing ulcers on his legs, he literally couldn't move. He became so massively immobile that his servants had to invent early elevators out of pulleys and ropes just to haul the king between floors. Let's pivot now to Section 4, Inventing Modern England by Accident. So, stepping away from the bloody soap opera of his personal life for a minute, let's look at the monumental, permanent machinery of government that this decaying king accidentally created. First, the English Parliament. To avoid looking like a tyrant, Henry forced Parliament to pass all his radical changes. This accidentally established the king in Parliament precedent, which is the very foundation of modern parliamentary democracy. Second, to defend his isolated island, he built the Royal Navy. He redesigned ships, putting gun ports low in the hull, turning them from floating infantry castles into long-range artillery batteries. Third, to justify his break with the Pope, he ordered an English Bible chained to every church lectern. Ordinary people learned to read, deeply injecting its poetic rhythm into the modern English language. Finally, he redrew the map, legally annexing Wales and aggressively claiming the crown of Ireland. But guys, here is the ultimate historical irony in all of this. Despite all the slaughter, the divorces, and tearing Western Christianity in half just to secure his bloodline, the Tudor dynasty lasted exactly 3 generations. Yep, all 3 of his children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, died heirless. In 1603, the crown simply passed peacefully to his Scottish rivals. As historians note, and this really hits the nail on the head, he changed England forever. Not because he wanted to build our future, but because he was desperately trying to escape his own past. Henry VIII was not an enlightened philosopher with a grand plan. He was a selfish, deeply paranoid tyrant who accidentally pushed his country out of the Middle Ages. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Do the worst tyrants sometimes build the best foundations? It's a wild thought, but it's an undeniable truth of this story. A paranoid 400-pound monster inadvertently launched the modern world.
Please like and subscribe.